Welcome to Division 4 Thrills and Spills. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch. The video that you are about to watch over the course of the next 40 minutes is comprised of roughly 12 years worth of my video collection filmed by myself and other family members at races we attended in the Division 4 portion of the United States of America. That's the South Central Division. The video is comprised of national and divisional events and a few races in between, and features record runs, spectacular crashes, near misses, and some really memorable pit shots from some of my favorite events. Again, thank you for taking the time to watch. I hope you enjoy this video. Please feel free to share it with others. We will begin our look with the Texas Pro Stock Association season opener in 1990 at Hallsville Raceway, with Willie Franks making his first qualifying pass of the season, looking for low ET, and as you will see, the car leads extremely hard, but then something very interesting happens as the passenger side door comes out along with the passenger side seat that is literally sucked out of the car. Franks would actually go on to set low ET and win the race, but had a very interesting road to get to that point. Now, it was quite a sight to see Willie Franks blow the passenger side door off of his car. But the very next car down the racetrack, Veneto Green, does the exact same thing, and while it may not have been in the same manner as what Franks did, it was quite interesting to watch literally in slow motion as the car wasn't moving quite as fast as Willie Franks was. The door came off earlier in the run, but another passenger side door was retrieved by a crew member on the racetrack. Brad Perlinzik at the 1990 Chief Auto Parts Nationals warmed up his top alcohol dragster, not knowing that in roughly 1 hour after this video was shot, he would take the ride of his life as the car became extremely loose at the finish line, rolling several times, destroying the race car. Perlinzik was transported via Life Air to the hospital, was not suffering from life-threatening injuries, but due to the violence of the crash, and I believe Perlinzik may have been momentarily knocked out, he was transported for evaluation. We move on to the 1991 Winston Drag Racing Series event at the Texas Motorplex, as East Brunswick, New Jersey racer Wayne Selko made an appearance at the Texas Motorplex with his top alcohol dragster, and it was quite a sight to see as Wayne made a wheels-up charge off the starting line, going to what was at the time the number 1 qualifying spot. He would end up number 2 and runner-up to Tom Conway before the event was over. Jimmy Jones found himself with a stuck throttle on his burnout in the Texas Trimmer Top Alcohol Funny Car Corvette. Didn't get in big trouble, but boy, it could have gone a different way. Speaking of one who did get in big trouble, this was Tim McCann driving the McGee Top Fuel dragster, and if you remember the McGee motor, it didn't always hold together real well. And while it held together decently well on this pass, when the car smoked the tires, the car got out of the groove and into the wall. While the car was not heavily damaged, it probably was a little bit of an embarrassing run for McCann, who had not driven that many Top Fuel cars that I knew of at that point. Up next came something I had never seen before in person. 1990 IHRA Pro Modified World Champion Tim McCamus showed up to test his Pontiac Trans Am at this particular race, running what was at the time a pretty impressive pass, 690 at 202 miles per hour, a run that by today's standards is slow for top sportsmen, let alone Pro Modified. Still at the 1991 race, the Winston Drag Racing Series event at the Texas Motorplex, Whit Bazemore The first time I remember seeing this particular car and driver showed up at the event to do some testing. The Permitex Ford Probe that many of you probably remember, as it was one of Witt's first recognizable cars, I would say, in funny car racing. And of course, Witt would go on to have quite an interesting career full of fires, crashes, and a lot of success. This has to be one of my highlighted parts of this video, one of my favorite areas, as Bazemore made a run, not very impressive, but very cool to see, bringing back a lot of memories. Tom Conway, somebody who, if you were familiar with Division 4 racing, was a literal kingpin in the top alcohol dragster category, showed up a little late at the Hallsville Winston Drag Racing Series event in 1991, but that didn't seem to hurt the veteran, as he came out on the qualifying pass, first qualifying pass on Saturday afternoon, to reset the track record at a astounding 6:11 at 221 miles per hour, a pass that was quite impressive for the short shutdown Hallsville Raceway at the time. Even wife Linda was impressed with the pass. To this very day, one of the most beautiful cars I have ever seen, probably one of my top 3 favorites ever, was the Oldsmobile Cutlass of Hugh Kelly, who had been the division champion in 1990 and had this brand new car to debut in 1991. Now, as I said earlier, that track at the time, Hallsville Raceway, was extremely short. You better get on the parachutes very quickly. But that didn't intimidate Hugh Kelly and his team as they came out and reset the track record with one of the most amazing passes I ever saw at the racetrack ever at Hallsville Raceway, as Hugh ran 6:22 at 227 miles per hour. That was a big speed for that track at the time, and as you saw, both parachutes successfully opened, which was a good thing. 1991 Chief Nationals, Don the Snake Prudhomme, who always wanted to make those rip their throats out, back-breaking passes and just destroy his competition, came out during the Saturday morning qualifying session and made an impressive run, which at the time there were not as many 4-second runs as we would eventually become accustomed to seeing. A 4:93 at 292 wowed the crowd. Moving on to the 1992 Chief Nationals, Joe Amato, one of the best to ever drive a top fuel dragster, came up for his first qualifying pass Saturday morning, making a very impressive run of 4:84. The crowd was mighty impressed, but Kenny Bernstein would impress even more as the Budweiser King rolled to the starting line for the first of 2 Saturday passes. This actually was not Kenny's best run of the event, as he ran 4:80. Later in the day, he would run 4:79 and establish a new national record. But Jim Head is literally the one who stole the show, carrying the front end past half track and staying in it, never lifting, one time running 4:97 at 276 miles per hour. Jim earned a parade lap in front of the crowd on the return road. The 1993 Hallsville Winston Drag Racing Series event was full of action in many ways, and it started off when a Super Comp dragster ran off the end of the racetrack. And while I don't remember the name of the driver or the condition of the driver after this crash, the car went off the end of the drag strip, hit some hay bales, and broke in half, catching fire. Eventually, Hallsville Raceway had to call in the local fire department to put the fire out. As you can see, the car was completely destroyed. Jay Meyer showed up from Freeport, Texas to race in Top Alcohol Dragster at the same event in 1993, looking to make the highlight reel, wanting to run big numbers and be impressive. Well, to say the least, as Jay came up to race Amy Falk in the first qualifying session for Top Alcohol Dragster, he most certainly would make the highlight reel, but not for reasons that I believe he had intended. As the car made its way down the racetrack, the car became loose. Jay Meyer lost control of the car, and you won't be able to see a lot because of the hill and the shutdown area, but eventually he got into the back of Amy Falk's car. Both cars were destroyed in the crash. Thankfully, both drivers walked away. One of the moments that I think I enjoyed the most was roaming the pits during this particular race in 1993 and coming across the Dreamweaver of John Weaver and his family from Hanford, California, that came out to Hallsville Raceway on their way back from the Gator Nationals. It was quite a weekend, as this was the first qualifying session. Only 3 cars were there. John Weaver went to the top, 624, 220 miles per hour. But the next day things would get a little more interesting and a lot more competitive, as Division 4 champion Jackie Stidham showed up at the racetrack with his alcohol funny car, looking to go to the number 1 qualifying spot, something he was quite accustomed to. And as it would happen in the first session on Saturday morning, John Weaver and Jackie Stidham would match up with each other, and this literally set the tone for the rest of the weekend, as these two Oldsmobile Cutlasses would battle head-to-head, running very close to each other. As you will see on this particular pass, Jackie Stidham goes to the number 1 qualifying spot. John Weaver would be in number 2. But that would all change when John came up to make his next qualifying pass in the final session late Saturday afternoon. The Dreamweaver would make its way down the racetrack to a new track record of 6:21. John Weaver regained the number 1 qualifying spot for the moment. The last car in line was Jackie Stidham, looking to regain that number 1 qualifying spot and try and take back the power and the prestige for Division 4 away from Division 7, which he would do as he reset the track record to a 6:19. Before the weekend was over, Stidham would be runner-up to John Weaver in the final round. Tom Conway also took the headlines that particular weekend in Top Alcohol Dragster, looking to become the first driver in the alcohol classes to run in the 5-second range at Hallsville Raceway. Conway was on his way to that 5-second pass, but the car got a little bit loose towards the finish line with an early parachute. Conway slowed to a 6:05 at 2:07, an impressive pass that most likely would have been around a 5:99 had the early parachute not taken place. One of the things that helps these cars to run really well is the crowd-pleasing burnout. Here are some of my favorites. Moving on to the 1992 Chief Auto Parts Nationals at the Texas Motorplex and Top Alcohol Dragster. At the time, the A-Fuel Dragsters did not dominate the class, but this was Keith Stark, coming up wanting to make the #1 qualifying spot, and he did just that with what was a very impressive pass at the time, 577 at 242 miles per hour. Brooks Brown, in the Tom Topping Top Alcohol Dragster, the A Fueler, came up at the same event looking to win the event, but to do so he had to get past Doug Doucette in the first round of eliminations. And one of the things you have to do is to be able to back up to the starting line after your burnout, something that Brooks was not going to be able to do on this pass. As you see, one of the Texas Motorplex track crew came out trying to help to shake the car, move the car around a little bit to maybe get it into reverse. Eventually a crew member came out to try and help, but to no avail, and Brooks, out of frustration, hit the throttle to get off the racetrack, could not get the win, and would not win the race. John Force came up a week after Chuck Etchells made his first 4-second pass, the first one in history at the Heartland Park race in Topeka, Kansas, and John made his first 4-second run, a 4.99 in less than ideal conditions. It was an impressive pass, and John, to say the least, was very happy, along with his crew, led by Austin Coyle. Even Tim Richards came over to offer his congratulations to this team on their impressive pass. And of course, John had to parade the car up the return road after this impressive run. Needless to say, the crowd was very happy, offering their cheers to the multi-time world champion. A run that will always stick with me at this particular race in 1993 was between Darrell Russell and Blaine Johnson in Top Alcohol Dragster. This was the TRW All-Stars race, which would be won by Blaine Johnson by two of my absolute favorite racers of all times. Moving on to the 1994 Winston Drag Racing Series events at Hallsville Raceway in East Texas. Tom Conway and Darrell Russell came up during the first qualifying session, and most people would probably think that the spotlight would be on Conway, but it would be on Darrell Russell actually, on this particular pass, as Russell would achieve what many had tried in the past, and that was to become the first driver in a blown alcohol dragster to run in the fives at the East Texas racetrack. And he did so with a 591, and as I remember looking through that lens, the viewfinder on the video camera, at first I thought it said 891 because it just didn't compute at first that somebody had actually run in the fives at that particular racetrack. Jackie Stidham would also improve his own track record as he ran a 611, but Mark Tolliver and Darrell Russell would steal the show in the final qualifying session as both ran in the fives, Mark Tolliver resetting the track record 590 to Russell's 596, the first ever side-by-side 5-second run at the East Texas racetrack. When you're just watching from the side view, it's often hard to tell how sideways these cars can actually get, as evidenced by this run by George Skater Chambers over in the far lane in the Dodge Daytona. You can tell the car moved around a little bit, but you can really tell from this view from the rear. The same qualifying pass, look at how sideways and how much Chambers got to drive the car on that pass, never letting out, making a full run. And it can happen in the dragsters as well, as Alan Hartley in the double vision dual motor Top Alcohol Dragster actually spun the tires, lost a piece of the wing, and drifted all the way across the racetrack into the opposite guard wall. Hartley was unhurt in the accident. His pride may have been a little bit hurt, and his feelings may have been hurt, but the driver was unhurt in the crash. Speaking of getting sideways, look at Kevin Odell in a Pro Modified at the 2000 World Finals in Shreveport, Louisiana, the car getting extremely sideways as he shook and spun the tires off the starting line. The passenger side door even popped open a little bit. In 1995, Jackie Stidham and brother Ronnie decided to make the switch that many had already made in the alcohol classes from the traditional root-style supercharger to the more power-freeing Whipple supercharger or screw-type supercharger. Now, to do this at Hallsville Raceway was a bit of a risky move because the track was not known to be able to hold as much horsepower as, say, the Texas Motorplex. And that became evident on the first qualifying pass, as this was actually the first run that the Stidhams had made with the screw-type supercharger on their funny car. The car was not badly damaged in this little wall banger. Stidham wasn't hurt, and eventually, of course, would go on to run some very impressive numbers with the screw supercharger on the car. In 1998, Darrell Russell stole the show at the Hallsville Winston Drag Racing Series event, as he would run 577 on this first qualifying pass, and as impressive as it was, he would actually improve to a 564 in the first shot on Saturday afternoon. But it was not Darrell who everybody was watching on this particular pass, as James Thompson was big time out of shape, had his car in both lanes at one point, and actually saved it without hitting anything. Todd Payton would also grab the headlines, as he would reset the Hallsville Raceway Alcohol Funny Car track record to a 586 on this pass. It wasn't the quickest pass of the weekend, however, as Todd Simpson would come up in the final qualifying session and run a 582. A very impressive run. That takes us to the 1998 IHRA World Finals at what was the brand new Red River Raceway, and Scotty Cannon came up with his Pro Modified, out of the groove, spinning the tires, and still running an astonishing, at the time, 637 at 220 miles per hour. Followed by an impressive run by Shannon Jenkins, the first ever car running nitrous oxide to get into the 630s, a 638. Very impressive pass. Cannon would come back at the rain-delayed portion of the event the next weekend to run a 631, establishing a new national record before the weekend was over, something that stood for quite some time at that point. Here's something that you unfortunately don't see a lot of. I wish you could see it today. Nobody allows it to be run at the time. An injected nitro funny car. Scott Weiss ran 580, a very impressive pass out of an alcohol or a fuel funny car at the time. And of course, Top Fuel at the 98 IHRA World Finals saw the track record reset many times by numerous drivers. Bruce Litton made the first shot, followed by Don Lampus, and finally, multi-time world champion Doug Herbert would come up later in the event. But first, Luigi Novelli would light things up as an oil line came loose on his Top Fuel dragster, and then Doug Herbert comes up and runs an impressive 479 at 307 miles per hour. To take the track record. Herbert would go on to eventually win the event, but the guy that won the Ultimate World Championship that year was Paul Romine in the CarQuest Top Fuel dragster tuned by the late Clayton Harris, and it would be clinched on this pass as Romine took out Luigi Novelli in the first round of eliminations. At the 2000 IHRA World Finals at the same racetrack, we saw Bob Newberry, who removed the screw-type supercharger from his alcohol funny car to put on a Roots-type supercharger, and ran a very impressive 585 on the first qualifying pass, and it was quite impressive. .585 at 241 miles per hour with a Roots-type supercharger was an impressive run, However, he would not be the number one qualifier, as it would actually be Jim Lape who would come back Saturday morning with his qualifying pass of 584 at 242 miles per hour to take the number one qualifying spot. Another amazing run at the same race was in the Pro Outlaw category by Michael Barclay's incredible Altered over in the far lane. Watch this pass. A 6:06 was a new record in the category and a very impressive run, but nothing could hold a candle to the drama in Pro Modified, as Quayne Stott was on the verge of possibly winning his first world championship, but he had to get by his brother Mitch in the first round, and it would not happen. A very climactic ending to a difficult season for Quayne Stott, as he wouldn't win that championship. Of course, in the sport of drag racing, with everybody being on the ragged edge, there's a lot of close calls, crashes, you never know what's going to happen. Here are some of the most wild moments that we captured on video. To close out Division 4 Thrills and Spills, I would like to share with you some of my favorite shots from the pit area, starting as far back as 1990. Again, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please feel free to share it with others, and enjoy the close of Division 4 Thrills and Spills.